1901, Andrew Carnegie signed a piece of paper. He didn't negotiate it. He didn't study it. He barely read it. And with that single signature, he walked away from what historians now estimate could have been 10 times his fortune. This is not a story about failure. It's a story about something far more dangerous, a success so blinding it made one of history's greatest businessmen stop paying attention at exactly the wrong moment. To understand what Carnegie gave away, you first have to understand what he built. Andrew Carnegie was born in 1,835 inches, a tiny weaver's cottage in Dunfermline, Scotland. His family had nothing. When the Industrial Revolution rendered his father's trade obsolete overnight, they did what desperate families did. They sailed to America. Carnegie arrived in Pittsburgh at 13 years old, speaking with a thick accent, owning almost nothing, knowing almost no one. He started as a bobbin boy in a cotton factory, earning $1.20 a week, then a telegraph messenger, then a telegraph operator, then a secretary. Each rung of the ladder climbed not through luck, but through a single obsessive quality. Carnegie paid attention. He watched, he learned, and he remembered everything. By his 30s, he had already made small fortunes in railroads, bridges, and oil. But Carnegie understood something most investors missed. The future wasn't going to be built from wood. It was going to be built from steel. He went all in. He built the most efficient steel mills in the world, vertically integrating everything: the iron ore mines, the coal fields, the railroad lines, the ships. He didn't just compete in the steel industry. He slowly, methodically became the steel industry. By the 1890s, Carnegie Steel was producing more steel than the entire nation of Britain. The man from the Scottish cottage had become the most powerful industrial force in the Western world. And then, at the peak of his power, he made his greatest mistake. It began, as so many fateful decisions do, with a conversation over dinner. In late 1900, Carnegie's partner and operational genius, Charles Schwab, gave a now legendary speech at a New York banquet attended by the most powerful financiers in America. Among the guests was J.P. Morgan, the most feared banker on the planet, a man who didn't just lend money to companies, a man who owned industries. Schwab spoke that night about the future of steel, about consolidation, efficiency, and the possibility of one unified American steel empire. Morgan sat in silence, listening to every word. When the dinner ended, Morgan pulled Schwab aside and asked one question: would Carnegie sell? Carnegie, who had been thinking about retirement and philanthropy, was intrigued. He and Morgan were not friends. They were barely acquaintances, but business was business. The negotiation that followed was almost absurdly simple because Carnegie made it that way. Rather than assembling lawyers, accountants, and advisors to audit every asset and model every future cash flow, Carnegie did something extraordinary for a man of his sophistication. He took a piece of paper. He wrote a number on it. He handed it to Schwab and said, "That's my price." The number was $480 million. Morgan received the note, looked at it for less than a minute, and said, "I accept." No counteroffer, no hesitation. The deal was done. Here is where the story turns. $480 million in 1901 translates to somewhere between $16 and $17 billion in today's money. By any measure of that era, it was the largest private transaction in human history. Carnegie became, overnight, the richest private individual on earth. When Morgan told him so, Carnegie reportedly replied, "I made one mistake. I should have asked for 100 million more." He said it lightly, almost as a joke. But he was more right than he knew, and in a way, he hadn't fully calculated. What Carnegie had sold became U.S. Steel the world's first billion-dollar corporation. Morgan merged Carnegie's assets with several other steel companies and created a monopoly so dominant it controlled over 60% of American steel production. Within years, the true value of what Carnegie had built became undeniable. The assets were worth not $480 million, but multiples of that. Some estimates suggest Carnegie left between $2 and $4 billion on the table. Others go higher. But the real mistake wasn't the price. The real mistake was in the contract. Carnegie had structured the deal largely in U.S. steel bonds, not cash, not equity. He trusted Morgan's paper over ownership stakes in the very empire he had built. As U.S. Steel grew into one of the most powerful corporations in American history, Carnegie watched from the outside. The man who built it all held bonds, while Morgan and his partners held the future. Carnegie later admitted in private correspondence that he had negotiated tired, distracted by thoughts of retirement and philanthropy, and had not subjected the terms to the scrutiny he would have given any earlier deal. He was 65 years old, mentally ready to exit, and it showed in the paperwork. What happened next is one of history's great ironies. Carnegie took his $480 million and did something almost no one expected from an industrial titan of the Gilded Age. He gave it away, nearly all of it. He funded over 2,500 libraries across the English-speaking world. He built Carnegie Hall in New York. He created universities, pension funds for teachers, and institutions for scientific research. He wrote a famous essay called The Gospel of Wealth, arguing that a man who dies rich dies disgraced. By the time he died in 1919, he had donated the equivalent of what would today be over $10 billion, almost his entire fortune gone, deliberately, systematically, to public good. And yet, in his final years, Carnegie never stopped thinking about the deal. Friends recalled him returning to it in conversation, not with bitterness, more with a quiet recognition of a chess grandmaster who spots the move he missed too late, but with perfect clarity. J.P. Morgan, for his part, never doubted the transaction. When asked years later if he had overpaid for Carnegie's steel empire, Morgan reportedly said, "Not by a dollar." He understood something: Carnegie had underestimated the compounding value of industrial dominance in a rapidly industrializing nation. The asset Carnegie priced in 1901 was worth far more by 1910, and Morgan knew it would be. So what does a 120-year-old business deal have to teach anyone alive today? Everything. Carnegie's mistake wasn't ignorance. It wasn't greed. It wasn't weakness. It was a mistake almost every successful person eventually makes. He negotiated from his current state of mind rather than from the objective value of what he held. He was emotionally ready to leave. And that emotional readiness bled into his financial judgment. The moment you decide you're done, you stop seeing clearly what you still have. There's a second lesson buried even deeper. Carnegie built an empire through obsessive attention to detail, but signed the most important contract of his life without reading it carefully. The bigger the decision, the more we sometimes convince ourselves that our instincts are enough, that we've earned the right to stop being rigorous. We haven't. Nobody has. Morgan understood what Carnegie possessed better than Carnegie did in that final moment. And that gap in perception, not in intelligence, not in experience, not in talent, was worth billions. Andrew Carnegie spent 40 years building the greatest industrial fortune America had ever seen. He spent his final years giving it away with equal dedication and purpose. History remembers him as one of the greatest philanthropists who ever lived. But somewhere between the steel mills of Pittsburgh and the signing table in New York, a tired man handed a piece of paper to the most ruthless banker in the world and walked away thinking he'd won. He had, just not by as much as he thought. And neither Morgan nor Carnegie ever forgot it. The most expensive mistakes in history are rarely made by people who didn't know better. They're made by people who did and looked away for just a moment too long.